As the Philadelphia 76ers continue to build out a roster that they aspire to be championship caliber, a familiar face may be returning to this team. We got some news that Marcus Morris is showing some interest in returning to the Sixers, or more so the Sixers showing interest in him. Per Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer, he writes, quote, "The Sixers have interest in signing the power forward to a free agency deal, according to multiple sources. The Detroit Pistons, Charlotte Hornets, Cleveland Cavs, Dallas Mavericks, Miami Heat, and Minnesota Timberwolves have also expressed some level of interest, according to a source." So there are a lot of names in the pot here, but there's a lot of familiarity with Marcus Morris and Philadelphia. We know that he spent some time playing for the Sixers last year following the James Harden trade, had some good moments with this Sixers team, and to be perfectly honest, exceeded my expectations a little bit for his impact on the floor. And we know that this is a guy as tied to Philadelphia as any person can come, that this is truly a guy who is a Philadelphia legend. He spoke a little bit about the concept of that while playing with the Sixers, and he was asked following one game about playing at home, and he said, quote, "I've been playing in the Sunny Hill League and things like that since I was a child. Coming to Sixers game when they had AI, going down to Fridays and seeing him, just that, and being able to go to the Eagles games, that shit is everything to me. I've been an Eagles fan my whole life, been a Sixers fan my whole life. Being able to put that jersey on, it's not forever. I'm happy to be here to say I did it." So we all knew that the first time that Marcus Morris came to the Sixers, there essentially was a time limit on it, that he was one of those tradable salaries, and ultimately was vital to bring in Buddy Hield at the trade deadline. Although that did not ultimately prove out to have the effects that the Sixers hoped by making the deal, we do understand why it went down and everything with that. And with Marcus Morris specifically, I do want to acknowledge that this guy is like a true Philadelphia hero. Like, I can speak personally that I've seen him at a couple of the events, most specifically playing in some of the pickup games and the action around the city, trains with Chuck Ellis and a bunch of other famed members of the city there. And he is a guy that, like, when you see him, he has a presence, that he is a local celebrity in a way. And for God's sake, this dude was handed the key to the city just last year during his time with the Sixers. But I know when talking about him, all the feel-good stories are great, but it is about what this guy can produce on the floor. And to speak about what he produced just last year, we're talking about with the Cavs, 6.4 points per game, 2.7 rebounds, shot 43.9% from the field, still 40.3% from three, and 42.9% from the corner. He is 34 years old, 6'8". He's a guy who's certainly a little bit over the hill for where his NBA career is, but not to the point where I don't think he can still provide productive minutes. That it's no longer this guy I view as a potential starting power forward, but he is a guy that I think could come in, come off the bench, and give some positive minutes. And to speak about his stats as a whole, again, it is a lengthy list here. Look at all these teams and years that he has spent in the league since the 2011 and 2012 season. And for overall clarity here, during the 37 games that he did play with the Sixers, 6.7 points, 2.9 rebounds, 0.7 assists, shot 43.9% from the field, 40% from three overall. He did make his impact felt, and for what it's worth, the last time we saw this guy on a basketball court was in Game 5 with the Cleveland Cavaliers against the Boston Celtics. And to pull up the results here, coming off the bench as the sixth man, Marcus Morris in 34 minutes scored 25 points, was second on the team in scoring, and did give them a little bit of a pulse during that game. And I remember watching that game being like, is Marcus Morris going to push the Celtics one more game? Was rooting for the whole way. Ultimately did not come together. Just too much firepower on the Celtics. Let's not forget that was following the Donovan Mitchell injury, with him not being capable of suiting up there. So shout out to Morris for stepping up, and that is kind of the microwave score that I would see his role on the Sixers team. I wish he was a little bit better rebounder. That when you dive into his stats as a whole, he's really not a guy that shines in this area. Through his career, 6.1 rebounds per game, the best tally he has ever totaled there, and that coming all the way back around the 2018-19 season. And most recently with the Sixers, just 2.9 per game there. Obviously limited minutes, so hard to read into that. When thinking about the context of the Sixers roster, I'm very big on the next move that I want to see for this Sixers team. We need a monster rebounder. We need a guy who, we saw the impact and how much the Sixers got beat up on the boards. We need a guy to combat that, and specifically a guy to pair with Joel Embiid that can help with that can play on the floor with him. Because I know a lot of these issues occurred during the stints without Embiid while he was sitting on the bench and resting for those periods of time. But Joel Embiid himself is not a guy who's an excellent rebounder. He, of course, basically sleepwalks his way into a double-double on a nightly basis because he is 7'2" and stands right under the basket for pretty much all of the defensive sets, and obviously has a chance at a lot of those, but he isn't a guy who has that skill for rebounding. Marcus Morris isn't that either, but we're talking about a Sixers team with just 8 players on roster right now, so I certainly would be open to bringing him into this, to be a professional bucket getter. That's who he is at this point. That's who he has been for most of his career, and I do think he's very capable of carrying that torch continually now. Now, when speaking to the Sixers salary cap perspective here, The brutal truth is I think we can only take Marcus Morris back on a veteran's minimum at this point in time. To talk about what we're looking at from the salary cap, shout out to Marty Teller here. He tweets out that time for some NBA salary cap nerding. It's been a while, so please check me if I have something incorrect. I do believe he is correct with these figures here. If the Sixers' remaining cap space figure to be $8.9 million is accurate, they should consider splitting it between two players, divided evenly. That's $4.45 million, about $300K less than that there. So as you can see, split up between 23-24 to 4.5 mil, 4.7 mil for the 24-25. That would break it down to 9.27. So you're basically kind of maneuvering the exception that they do have. They basically have money for one $9 million player, or split that up into 4.5 million players, and then the minimum, which sits between 2 and 3 million, sometimes a little more than 3 million, depending on the years in the league, your veteran status, and a couple other factors that have to go with that. But the bottom line is they are, bargain bin shopping a little bit here. So I still think it is important to keep that level of flexibility for a player that I do think can have a larger impact than Marcus Morris. But on a minimum, I absolutely would love him back on this Sixers team. He is a guy who, beyond just being capable as a scorer, being a very good shooter, he did get red hot for stretches with this Sixers team. And he's a guy that's comfortable shooting over players. I think that's to compare it to Buddy Hield once again, who, of course, was part of the trade that sent Morris out of here. For Buddy Hield, you needed the perfect circumstances for him to get that three-point attempt off. And while he was very high level when those chances arrived, they just don't occur all that often. For Marcus Morris, he's completely comfortable if you got a guard up in his grill and just rising up and shooting over him. That he is real deal 6'8", and he is unbothered by having a hand in his face shooting, which is an interesting and important skill to have. And I do respect and would be valuable on the Sixers team. He's also a tone setter, and that was felt even further when he joined the Cleveland Cavaliers. There was a talk of him getting ejected for a game where he had a hard foul on a guy going up to the basket, and he basically said, I want to set the standard that we're not allowing anybody to dunk against us. And I do like where that's coming from. I did not see that level of nastiness during his time with the Sixers, but it's also not fair to hold that completely against him. Again, to factor in, when he came to Philadelphia, it was a little bit after the season started in that James Harden trade, and then he left at the trade deadline. So it's not like he had this amount of time to put in this level of culture that he could possibly produce for a team. And I do think, once again, the calling card for Marcus Morris, he's accomplished a lot in his basketball career at this point. He's put up the numbers. He's made his money. At this point in time, it would be way more about staying home, playing in Philadelphia, representing the city, and having a true chance to compete for a championship. That for probably the most likely opportunity of his career. He has played for some very good teams as well when talking about some of those Clippers teams, which, by the way, teammate of Paul George back then. So you can make a case for that, but I think that connection to Paul George helps, that connection to the city. And I'll also note that Nick Nurse spoke incredibly highly of Marcus Morris throughout his time with the Sixers. Just talked a lot about his veteran leadership, how good he is at just being responsive with some of the young guys, taking people under his wing. There was a lot of that from Nick Nurse, and in general, Nurse is not a guy who comes with that type of fluff to the media there, that he tends to be a guy who isn't overly, aggressive in the praise that he does give out. Morris was a guy who found showered with it quite a bit. So I do think that is worth noting there, and I think Nurse would absolutely sign up on it. So in the right situation, for a guy that we're talking probably like a 15 to 20 minute per game type guy on a normal basis, I would love to have Marcus Morris as a part of the Sixers team. I did enjoy the period of time that he spent in Philadelphia last year. I do think it would mean a lot to him to be back in action and be representing the city once again. And for what it's worth, I'll also note this, that shout out to my guy RB Philly Take tweeting out that his potential Sixers targets, and he mentioned Marcus Morris as the last name on that list. And shout out to his brother Markieff Morris, who not as good as his brother by a pretty significant margin, I would say, but still a guy who's been around the NBA for a decent bit and still kind of hanging on at this point. But he commented right back at RB and said, flip that order of that list from top to bottom. And RB just chirped back and said, not in any particular order, but would love to have your brother back here. So kind of cool that they are reading the tea leaves to that extent. I know Markieff Morris was a guy who wanted to join the Sixers as well. As I mentioned, that I have seen a notable gap between Marcus and Markieff, and particularly seen that up close and personal when kind of checking out some of the action and seeing some of the city hoops and pickup leagues type around here. So unfortunate there, but I would love to have Marcus Morris back on this Sixers team, and I do hope that feeling is mutual. It is a bit concerning to me, all these other teams that do seem to be in the mix. I'd probably label the Cavs and the Mavericks, and maybe even the Heat as teams that could potentially go above the price range the Sixers would be willing, but this is going to be about whatever Morris's priorities are, and if he wants to come home and retire a Sixer, the Sixers should absolutely do everything to make that happen there. So let me know if you guys agree with me in the comments. Would you welcome Marcus Morris back on this team, and what type of role do you see with him? Personally, I've said how I feel, kind of a bench rotation player. He's not the guy that I've circled as that missing player in the starting lineup, but he's certainly a guy that will be in the mix and play minutes there. So that is a win in my book, especially if you can get him at a minimum contract there. So appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning into this video. Make sure you are smashing that subscribe button if you have not on the channel. Drop a like on this video, any comments you have below, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.